Hello, everyone. Welcome to our outstanding panel here. It's great to have you all tune in. I'm Suki, Sandhu. I'm the founder and CEO for Audeliss and Involve. I'm very excited to welcome you all. You can see us all having a bit of a dance to Ross. I'm sure we're all desperate to do that together without any social distancing when it's safe to do so. But I'm really excited to welcome our guests that we have joining us today. And we're going to have a conversation about where are all the LGBT plus leaders in business. And we're joined by our outstanding role models from 2020, and we're celebrating them, although I know it's 2021, but something called the pandemic got in the way, hence why we're doing it now. And we're going to be talking to them about why there are only 4 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who are opening out, and there are no out LGBT plus CEOs of the FTSE 100 currently. So why is this? And let's have a conversation. So we want this to be really interactive. So please do use the Q&A function, the chat function to send your comments, any questions you might have. And then one of my team is going to be sending them to me so that I can pose them to the panelists. So I'm going to get straight into the introduction so we can start this conversation. And one by one, our panelists will introduce themselves, hopefully with a little fun fact they might have about So I'm going to hand over to Beth Ford first.
Suki, come on. Okay, first of all, love the club music to get it started, okay? It made me feel like I was in my 20s or 30s again. And now, you know, I'm just, even when the clubs open up again, you don't want to see somebody like me, my age, out in the clubs. Let's just agree to that.
Yes, we do. Everyone is welcome.
Okay, all right, okay. I'm Beth Ford. I'm the president and CEO of Land O'Lakes. He keeps trying to pressure me on a fun fact, and I'm not sure about that, Suki. But I will say yesterday, somebody from one of my team was talking about being in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And I was like, oh, Fort Dodge, Iowa. And I'm from Iowa originally, those of you Midwest. And I said, Fort Dodge is meaningful for me because that's where I got my ears pierced. And that happened after using the brown liquor. And that was not a good moment. And that was the last time I had brown liquor. That's all you need to know. That's not a fact. That's just a story.
Actually, you can share a fun story as well. Fun stories are very welcome as well.
Okay, so there we go. That's it. All you need to know is that was the liquid courage that got me to get my ears pierced.
And so, Greg, let's come to you, please.
Suki, first of all, it's a great case, the CEO of Aon, and I'm just really delighted to be here. Really looking forward to the discussion today. And I'll tell you, I'm speaking for Aon and Willis Towers Watson. We're bringing our 2 firms together, and the shared values around inclusion and diversity are so important to what we're about, what we're trying to do. So it really, really radiates even beyond Aon. Listen, just delighted to be here. Now, Beth, we were just struggling whether she was going to do the fun fact, and if she didn't, I was going to save me, but she was bold as usual. So yeah, I'll Suki, only for you. So for the group, I grew up in Kansas. That's a state in the USA for those who aren't aware of it. And spent a lot of time sort of in the wheat harvest and spent one summer at Suki. You've heard some of these stories. One summer I spent inside these big, huge box cars, these hopper cars that haul wheat and flour. I spent an entire summer inside of them, crawling down inside, cleaning them. So if anybody on the WebEx, and I just want to be very open about this, has any questions about the inside of these box cars, I'm your person. Come to me, I'm the one. It did reinforce for me, Suki, the importance of an academic pursuit. So I take that as a lesson in life. It was a very good one if anybody ever wanted to repeat. So there you go. Only because of Beth, you get that piece of info.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Beth, for encouraging Greg. Leigh, to you. And let us know where you all are, actually, because you're joining us very late.
Yeah, it's already 1:09 a.m. in the Philippines. So my name is Leigh Capule. I'm one of the managers in HSBC GST Philippines. Fun fact, I thought you guys were not going to share, so I thought I was saved. But anyway, I think, one fun fact, I think, ever since, even before I was born, I think the doctors already knew that I'm going to be a trans woman. Because in my original birth certificate, it was actually F on the gender, and then it was overtyped with an L. So I think way back, they knew that I was going to be a transgender woman, and I'm out.
Yay, it was written in the stars, that's what it was. And I suppose I should share a fun fact as well, because you all have. So I shouldn't get away with it either. But my fun fact is I once starred in a Fergie music video. Fergie from Black Eyed Peas. That's all I'm going to say.
Really?
Video
Have to see this.
It's London Bridge. And obviously, I don't want you all Googling it now because you're supposed to pay attention to this conversation. So do it afterwards. And I'm only in it for a few seconds, but I'm one of the paparazzi in the background. That's my claim to fame. But Beth, we're going to get straight into the questions. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. And for those that don't know, so I should have mentioned, Beth is our #1 executive for 2020. Greg is our #1 ally, and Leigh is our #1 future leader. So we're really excited to have the #1s with us today. Beth, I wanted to ask you, with you're the first openly out woman CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and you've made it a priority to share the message that everyone benefits when we're all allowed to be our authentic selves in the workplace. So what are some of the ways that you've shaped your organization to be inclusive, and how can businesses do the same?
Well, sometimes I think it's as simple as showing up as your authentic self, right? Cultures are developed because it's a combination of people. And part of that is what you tolerate, what you do not tolerate. So it would be simplistic of me to say, oh, listen, we've got 11 ERGs, employee resource groups, to recognize the differences of folks. And, structurally, those are things that you put in place. But more importantly, I think it's the way that you show up and put voice and encourage people every day. And it's not just me. Oftentimes I'll be doing a town hall. I've got, thousands of people that are asking questions. And Beth, what are you going to do? And I'm like, what are you going to do? It's not just me. It's not Beth's company. It's our company. And so you need to show up as your authentic self. I embrace that. You are valued. And I think frequently we hire the whole person. We don't hire the accountant. We don't hire the engineer. We hire the whole person. That person shows up, and all of the richness of who they are shows up at the same time. And what we try to do, and especially now, is meet them where they are. And I think when you do that, when you authentically are embracing the differences, encouraging the differences, that you get to get a richer culture. And more engagement and more excitement about the business and the mission. So that's the way I think of it, Suki.
I think even just hearing you saying it as the CEO, that you welcome everyone, is critically important for everyone to hear in the business. And I think that there's that whole thing around culture fit versus culture add. I don't know if there's anything that you'd say around that, because are there any dilemmas or issues you have, for instance, when it comes to bringing in talent, that it's more about what they bring culturally and adding to it, not trying to fit into what you already have?
Yeah, the thing is, everybody's on their own life's journey, aren't they? I mean, I can encourage people to show up as themselves. I can encourage them to say, I want your voice. I want your best efforts. And that's additive by definition. But I think that, what you have to recognize is everybody's on their own life's journey, and mine may be different than somebody else's. And so even during this pandemic, you're not going to hear me say, as I said this to my team, you're not going to hear me say, aren't you just lucky you have a job? Look at all these people who lost their job. Yeah. Or aren't we lucky that the business is performing well? Because, I don't know somebody else's life. I don't know what's happening in their home. I don't know what's happening with their parents or their family or whatever. And I think that would be, it would be simplistic to tell somebody you should just be grateful, because I don't know that. And when you say that empathetically, authentically, then I think, to your point, is it additive? Is it part of it? I'm not sure. But you hope that what ends up is that you have an engaged workforce and engaged people.
And as you say, like with the remote working, we're all getting glimpses into people's home lives when you're doing the remote working. Like, I love that artwork.
Like how?
Yeah,
It's becoming iconic here, Suki. Every interview I do, they're like, I'm like, I haven't named the cow yet. But I'll tell you, to your point, I've been doing live interviews, like I was doing something with the Washington Post or something like that. And one of my sons, I have 3 children, my twins still at home, there's boys 16 next week, and they're low crawling into my office in their underwear to get their technology. I'm like, I'm on a CEO, for God's sake, what are you doing? You see all of it. You see people's cats jumping up and their dog and, you know, their kids or whatever. And how great is that?
I think it's fantastic. Because
yeah,
ordinarily you wouldn't have that interaction. So I think
right. They don't see me as the CEO then, they see me as Beth, you know, that's fine. That's great.
Leigh, I'm going to come to you. You've consistently used your platform to help shape organizational policies so that they are inclusive of LGBT plus people. What are some of the tips you can share with those who are starting out on their journey to become inclusive leaders?
I think Beth has made a very good point in terms of coming to work, coming out and be your authentic self. That's very important.
Right.
I think, you know, being passionate about who you are would really, you know, paint a picture for someone on how you would like them to perceive you, right? If you can't accept yourself, definitely we cannot expect anyone to accept us. So that's the very first thing that you need to do. I think in terms of the platform, one of the things that I also do is to have that strong sense of self, to be out there and to advocate for the rights of specifically for trans women like me. Finding a passionate co-members of the LGBT community within the organization is very important as well. As a leader of the Pride Plus Ally Network in the organization, I think it was very important to find other passionate members to help me and support me towards amplifying our call for equality within the organization itself. Another thing is that it's a good thing that we have Beth and Greg, because one of the things, I actually created my own rainbow process towards establishing an inclusive workplace. So number one is definitely finding a passionate LGBT member. Number two is finding that executive sponsor from the leadership team. And that's very important, you know, no matter what we do, if we don't have that sponsor to become our voice and the EXCO meetings towards, you know, advocating for the policies that we're trying to change, then we're working for nothing. Right. And then finding an HR champion, Suki, is very important as well to advocate that for us.
Well, I think we're going to have to turn that into some kind of little video after this. So I'm sure we're going to be in touch and we're going to create something great for your tips around inclusive cultures. Greg, I'd love to come to you and talk about allyship, because 2020 has shown us that passivity is no longer an option in the fight for LGBT plus equality. As someone who has been an active ally of LGBT plus inclusion and equality as a whole, what advice do you have for allies who are looking to step up and be active in their advocacy within business?
Well, Suki, happy to offer some observations. I would say for me and for Aon, we have a long way to go, but I'll tell you one thing that becomes clear. All good things in life, they require true commitment, energy, investment, a plan, perspective, and we've worked hard on that. If you step back, think about it, in the end, we all have to. I love the way Beth and Leigh described this, the way they described authenticity and vulnerability. We all have to be open to that and be willing to evolve and recognize you're going to evolve wonderfully if you'll actually take that step. That's a message that, you know, can't be a side message. It's got to be a core message, but that's not enough. You count them to real tools, real capabilities. We've got a wonderful ally guide that's been downloaded and studied by half the firm. By the way, that's not enough with our 50,000 colleagues, but half are actually going through a very specific ally guide. This idea of creating the mechanism to compare notes, to exchange stories. I mean, really, real stories around what's going on is we found fundamental. Beth, I have two sons as well. It's so important, you know, no matter who they decide to love in life, they understand they're going to be loved no matter what. That level of authenticity has got to permeate into our workplace. And in doing so, Suki, I still come back to the more than anything else, it's consistent with all we're doing in our business. So in the end, this is fundamentally about the power of inclusion. And the power of inclusion drives talent, and talent drives success. That actually is reinforcing. It's not a side gig. This is fundamental to our success. And that psychology, that approach, that culture, we have found very reinforcing. Again, a long way to go. And the final point I would make is accountability, because you can set the stage, you can get all the conditions right, but you know, there should be we've got to create as much accountability around the power of inclusion as we do around growing our business, improving profitability. All those things are great, but in the end, it's all driven by talent, and that's holding each other accountable for progress. And The beauty of this is it's very reinforcing and very positive when you see the conditions work. And again, I wouldn't put us up as the experts in any way, shape, or form. We have a long, long way to go. But you can certainly see the conditions, and conditions with accountability can make a big difference.
And actually, I loved what you said about vulnerability and leaders being vulnerable. And I think being visible in their vulnerability, because it destigmatizes issues in the workplace. For instance, like mental health, it's okay to be okay, but we need to see our leaders being open about any issues they might have, because vulnerability is not a bad thing. And I think the archetype of what a leader is evolving as time goes on, away from what the traditional type of leader might look like. I don't know if you've seen that evolve in your businesses, the kind of leaders and the qualities that you look for now in someone that is an inclusive leader. Beth, I don't know if you have seen an evolution in that.
Yes, I mean, I'm looking at them, holistically. One of the benefits, I'm going to say, of COVID, and as an aside to that question, I guess, is, we're doing this. It's like we're doing this event here on this screen, right? And we're all tired of the screen. I get it. But there's a democratization that has occurred, with everybody has a box. And when everybody has a box, they feel more able, instead of being in the conference room. So let's say you're a remote employee and you're calling in, and it's always you're trying to jump in like, I've got something to say. And instead now everybody's kind of got the box, they've got the square, right? And when you so back to the leadership, when you have a leader who understands the power of that, the fact that we're all kind of here, it's not like there's not levels, but there's a leveling and an ability to have an engaged discussion. You see that more clearly. Now I'm going to say in COVID, it's interesting to me to watch my leadership team, and we're a fairly good sized business, $15+ billion. I've got these leaders, they're looking at different areas. I can't see them every day. I don't see how they're interacting, because this is one of the limiters. I don't see that, but you can see in the way their team engages in different ways with our organization. So does it change the way I'm thinking of leadership? No, I've always thought when I'm interviewing somebody, even for the head of R&D or head of engineering, they need to start with the way they view people leadership, the responsibility, the joy of it. And even if they're technical experts, if they don't start with that, I don't hire them for the role. Because what I recognize is that nobody goes into any position knowing everything. And if you have the appropriate level of humility and leadership, meaning you've got to have followers to have leadership, then you're approaching it appropriately. And so I think in this time especially, you have the best listeners. You have those who can really drive engagement in different ways. This has been a change. And I don't know that it's different. I think it's just, different visibility to it.
Yeah. And Greg, I think you were going to add something about this as well, leadership qualities.
Well, I just think Beth has captured this so well. This idea that in the end, it's how we interact and how we connect that makes for a stronger organization, a more dynamic, more evolving organization. And I would say we completely agree. For all of the negative, and there's been so much in 2020 with COVID-19, the positives, and by the way, we were talking about this before we started today, Suki, we got to a place where we reject the idea of new normal. Yeah. It's corrosive, it's negative, we're accepting pain. And we came to the idea of new better. Now, new better basically is this WebEx, this Zoom call. My guess is we have more participating than we might have otherwise. We've got client calls now with thousands who are chiming in. And as Beth described, you have a chance really to connect with your organization that's not personal in its old form, but personal in a new way that actually can be incredibly effective. And this idea of new better, again, not easier, but better in terms of connectivity, innovation. And to our issue today around inclusion and diversity, we've seen it as a real catalyst of connectivity. We have great groups in San Francisco and in New York and Madrid and London and Singapore. Now they're talking to each other more than they ever have before. So we're connecting on the idea and the issues of inclusion and diversity more than ever before because of this medium and because everybody got comfortable with it, whereas before it would have been less so. So I'm with Beth completely. I think, you find the opportunity here and you really push it, and it matters. It matters to culture.
We're getting lots of comments coming in, by the way. There's no way I can read them all, but I'm seeing a lot of people saying they're already going to steal the new better, by the way. You should have trademarked it, Greg. That could have been a like.
T-shirts, hats. Let's
Yeah.
do this, Greg.
Yes.
Gotcha.
But actually, while we're on the subject of remote working, I mean, how are you all coping with it? What are your tips for kind of doing remote working effectively? Leigh, let's come to you first.
To be honest, tips of how to actually make use of remote working better for you, I think it's really up to you. You know, you have to come up with your own agenda for the day. You know, some people will actually go and start with, you know, Zoom meetings at the onset, and then do do their whatever deliverables towards the latter part of their day. I think, how do I say it? How do we make it better? To be honest, it seems a simple question, but somehow it's difficult to respond. But I think, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll say that's okay. I mean, I'm keen to just a quick kind of tip. Like, for instance, mine is setting boundaries. So being really clear that when it gets to, and for me, it's probably like 7, 8 p.m. is the latest, or maybe 9 p.m. latest if my husband allows me, the last that I will look at my emails, so that I can actually settle down and make sure I actually sleep, because the day do blend into one.
True. Well, one thing, make yourself beautiful all the time, specifically with video calls and stuff. So actually, one of the things that I did is I really bought a ring light, to ensure that, proper lighting is there. I think it's very important that you feel good about yourself, specifically during this pandemic. The mental state of everyone is at risk. So making sure that, you know how to cope with it by beautifying yourself, making yourself available for, for different conversations over the internet, or, over YouTube or something, make yourself knowledgeable and cognizant about current events. I think that's one of the things you can cope with it.
Thank you, Leigh. Beth, we spoke briefly about it, but what's your tip though for remote working?
I found at first it was, when we all started working from home, I was like, okay, this is strange. You're right. What am I doing? My office is next to my master bedroom. My spouse, my wife's office is downstairs. We still had my daughter home at that point too. So we had three teenagers going to school, right? So at first it felt disrupted. Now I'm a very structured person. So I get up the same way I did. I get up at 5 a.m. I have my coffee. I go down to my gym. I work out. I come back up. I walk the dog. I get the kids to school. I get dressed for my day, and I'm off to my day. To Leigh's point, I'm not showing up in a t-shirt and shorts next to, because I'm doing constant meetings, external meetings, interviews, whatever it might be. And that I found real structure to that. Now, I'll tell you the couple joyous things is sometimes my kids are doing hybrid school. So sometimes I'll go downstairs and they're having lunch and I get to see them. But on the downside is I always feel like I have to go do a load of laundry. Okay, I've got half an hour. I better throw in some laundry and I better get the dog out or something like that. So there's not a separation, but I find some structure in my day doing the exact same things. And then I finish and I go and I change into the same way like I came home and I changed. And that structured approach keeps it, fresh for me. I understand the separation. I'm at work now, and that seems to work.
Greg, anything from you on remote working?
Yeah, I don't know if I could add. That's all great insights here, Suki. I would say, listen, that's a phenomenon. We all thought we were going to go work from home, and we realized we were all sleeping at work. And that can become really, really problematic, right, over time. And the only thing I would add is, and Beth and Leigh talked about sort of the limitations, so important. I just would offer talking about the limitations with your teams, because it doesn't take too many people. We all have to be together on this. Be together on literally building and reinforcing. And to the extent you're doing that in your respective firms and companies, very, very important. And as you do that, you get to a little bit more of an ecosystem that actually feels reinforcing, as opposed to you have to do this for yourself. No, you're doing it because we all recognize it's the right thing to do. And after a year, you got to find some equilibrium. Otherwise, it's not practical.
I think we have to also remember about, particularly for the LGBT plus community, is dealing with loneliness and mental health issues, which can be higher in our community, but also recognizing that, like we talked about people being in small apartments, there could be LGBT plus communities in families that are more homophobic. So actually going to work was their place of escape to not be in that environment at home. So we have to be doubly mindful of checking in to making sure that they're actually okay. I've got to ask this question because it's come from someone called Olivia who's here. She's 13 years old and she's asked, she says, I am part of a D&I group at school. Do you have any change on how to, do you have any advice on how to make a change and be a good ally as a young person in her secondary school? So Greg, do you want to take that one?
Well, listen, I want to be, I don't have truth. I would just say, Beth started us off perfectly, I think, on this. This is genuine. This is authentic. This is a real conversation. And to the extent you can foster real conversations and you do it in a holistic way, great things come of that. And I think if you've got a friend, be a friend, have a real conversation. By the way, these are uncomfortable. Yeah. Guess what? They get uncomfortable all times. That's how it works. Who cares? Uncomfortable is good.
Yeah, I think it's a great, I mean, if you've got people that are out at 13 years old at school, I think that's a pretty good, like inclusive environment to begin with, if I'm honest, Olivia. So I'm sure you're doing a great job as an ally already. Let's go to our next question. So at Involve, we've called for organizations to track LGBT plus data in the way that they do with gender and race. Why do you think businesses have yet to collect LGBT plus diversity data? Beth, can we come to you first?
Well, I mean, I think it goes to whether people self-identify. I mean, you know, so some people will, some people won't. Some people find that intrusive, some people do not. And so then when you track that, what is the what? Now, most folks have ERGs now, employee resource groups. Certainly we do, and that's terrific. But oftentimes, and I chair that for all of the groups. We have you know, young professionals. We have mental, you know, folks with mental health issues. All of these things. The question I ask them is, what do you want to achieve with your group? And so the same thing on tracking this. What is it that we want to message? And are we looking for opportunities to collect together? Well, we have that with our ERGs. Are you looking to make sure that those who are minorities or diverse employees are being promoted more directly, getting into more senior leadership? I mean, what we need to say is, when we're tracking, what are we tracking and what are we tracking about? Why? What is the, especially from a business perspective, why are we trying to do that? Because the first thing I would say is, do we have support groups? We do. Resource groups? We do. And then what is after that? Is it we want to get together, we want to achieve something, what might that be? And so I go back to the start of that, Suki, which is folks need to feel comfortable self-identifying, right? People with disabilities, we have a significant number of disabilities, they don't self-identify, right? Because there are different types of disabilities. And so it really goes to what is the comfort of the individual in doing so.
And Greg, anything you'd add about why LGBT plus data isn't being collected?
Yeah, so listen, first and foremost, the underpinning, the thesis has to be collected. But over time, we have to know more so we can make better decisions and drive better outcomes. Back to the idea of accountability. The movement from the conceptual and the right thing to do, we're feeling good about it, building culture, that to it's a core part of how we drive talent, support talent, means it's got to be captured over time. That's right, though. It's about self-reporting. So this is going to sound a little counterintuitive. We have 75 to 80% of our colleagues in the UK, for example, self-report on sexual orientation. That's great. It needs to be 100, but it's 75 now. We have more information there. Before, we've got, you know, circa probably 4,000 colleagues in our Pride business resource group. They're pushing, excellent, phenomenal. But in the end, what's counterintuitive is this is data analytics, but it's really, in Beth's point, is really trust. This is all about trust, building trust so colleagues are comfortable knowing that this is going to be reinforcing in ways we can support them, means we have data. Without it, Suki, you end up kind of where we are now. So this is really, we build trust, we'll get the data, we can take more action.
Well, I mean,
you know, I'm seeing some of the comments that are coming in as we're talking, and it is a noteworthy that some will say that it's not legal in particular countries. And I've spoken at events before, and they're saying, how should we think about this in my country? And so on this self-identification, you know, what I say is the first thing you need to do is feel safe. Yeah. In some places you don't feel safe. And we need to understand that we're not all living in a safe zone, or, you know, there's some real legal issues. So, you know, I agree the data is helpful, but then the question is, what is the what? And then is it legal? And are people feeling safe? And thus the comment on self-identification. I think it's a delicate balance.
Completely.
And I completely agree. And it really is the trust ideas that leads to self-reporting, because I know it's a reinforcing positive as opposed to something that's it can't be negative. It's got to be viewed as a very positive step.
Well, what gets measured gets done ultimately. So if we don't have the data, how do we progress the representation, particularly as we are talking about where are all the LGBT plus leaders? Like, I know we have our role model list over the last 8 years where I feel like there have been more coming out, but at CEO level, it is sparse. So why do we think that there are, because statistically speaking, it should be higher in the Fortune 500, and we should have
But we should also have more women.
Yes.
Okay. And how's that going? How's that working out for us?
Yeah.
You know, now a little bit better, 30 or 40 is progress, but you would expect that, wouldn't you? What we know is probably there were other Fortune 500 CEOs who were not out. Now I've been out since I was in my 20s or 30s, so it wasn't like I got to be the CEO and then I came out. I was, that was part of my journey, because after a while, I mean, it's not like the kids just showed up on the doorstep, right? Didn't hit a bar or something and ended up with the family. And so, at a certain point, you're living your whole life. When you say, why not? Listen, become a CEO, and I'm sure Greg will tell you this, this is not, it's not an easy journey for anybody, LGBTQ, whichever. I mean, there are professional responsibilities and sacrifices you make to get to the senior most levels of companies. So first of all, it's a very competitive environment. And then secondly, it really goes back to somebody's own personal journey. I see it more welcoming in companies these days. Certainly, when I was named CEO, there were 28 men on the board, no women. And they still named me CEO. It goes to performance, and it goes to a lot of different things. So I think that there's welcoming, or it's not a barrier, but it really requires some sacrifices and a journey to get there. And then, is it the right cultural fit for you as an LGBTQ employee to say, I can be my best self, my most authentic self, and achieve that senior most level.
Yeah, because I think we've seen obviously strides with gender and race, with targets being set, but nothing so far for LGBT plus. But I know in the UK, for instance, the Financial Reporting Council, which does a lot of the governance code for listed companies, did their first study end of last year to starting the dialogue and conversation about what LGBT plus representation could look like, which is quite exciting. So we'll see how that moves forward. We've got a great question here from someone called Samantha. I find that a lot of people in our company are reluctant to declare their personal characteristics, particularly on sexual orientation. We know as a D&I team how important this is, but how can we better explain to people why it's important for the employees themselves? A lot of people don't understand why their sexual orientation is relevant at work. Leigh, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the questions that we need to ask is, how do all of the company staff really understand the concept of SOGI, which is sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression?
Yeah.
We need to target educating and making them aware of what SOGI is, how important it is, what kinds of culture are we trying to drive. And I think one of the reasons as well why people are not that open, I think Greg mentioned it a while ago, building that trust type of culture is something. They don't want to be branded as such, right? A lot of people don't want that kind of branding. I think one of the things that we really need to do is establish that culture that embraces diversity and inclusion, and it needs to start from the top. I can totally understand that a lot of people would say, no, we don't want to impose our beliefs on somebody else. But hey, you know what? It's 2021, and a lot of people still target people because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression because of different points of views in terms of, you know, religious and cultural beliefs, right? So the leaders should make a stand and make sure that we drive and ask that question: what type of brand does this company really want to have? Do we want an embracing type of brand in terms of inclusion, or, you know, do we push people away because we don't, you know, promote diversity and inclusion within the organization?
Yeah, fantastic. And I think we have to also remember that heterosexual people are displaying their sexuality every day because they talk about their husband, their wife. So why are we not able to talk about our own same-sex partners as well? We should be afforded the same conversation at the water cooler, or when you're making a coffee, or whatever it might be, or being able to comfortably put your photos of your family same-sex partner on your desk, for instance. Anything else that you'd add on that, Beth?
No, I mean, I think, you know, that you've said it well, but it really does go to what is the culture of the organization? What is the, you know, the trust factor in a variety of ways? This would be evidenced as one. You know, I think I've worked in 7 companies in 6 industries. Each culture is different. And some of them, I you know, especially early in my career, I was very reluctant because I was trying to climb the ladder, and, you know, I was barely comfortable with myself, right? In that situation, you know, you're trying to figure out your own self. And it wasn't until my, you know, early 30s I met my wife, and then I thought, okay, well, you know, I'm past it. I'm moving on. I'm doing this thing. But the culture thing, a perfect example was I was interviewing. If somebody asked me to come down and interview for a role, I interviewed for a role. It was a terrific job, big company, big job. And they said, we'd love for you to come in and take it. And I said, you know, you on a scale of 1 to 10, working for you, you're an 11. You're awesome. The job, big job, that's an 11. This location is a 0. It's a minus number. And they were like, what? And I said, I have a wife. We have a daughter at that point. And this is not a welcoming community. This is not a welcoming atmosphere for my family. And I cannot do that. And they said, well, but we have pockets. And I said, I'm not living in anybody's pocket. I am living a rich, full life, and I will not do that. I'm not going to do that for my family. And similarly for companies, they can be very sharp-elbowed environments. They can be very collaborative environments. They can be welcoming environments. They can be a really authoritarian environment, a hierarchy. And you have to get to that right place so that you can achieve your professional success, but be a whole person. And that's why I say we hire the whole person. Yeah. We embrace the whole person, because then you bring your best work. You be your best self. And that is about location. It's about the culture. It's about everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I offer a thought on this?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Just briefly. Listen, I just from my point of view, I think Beth and Leigh have captured this so perfectly. I mean, think about your own organizations. I think about Aon. If we are not evolving our culture to be more inclusive, we miss Beth early in her tenure. It's a massive miss. It's terrible. We miss Leigh early in her tenure until you get to a place where they're more comfortable. That's not acceptable. This is about how we want to evolve as an organization. So you kind of come back to the mandate and why it matters to be to create an environment where everyone can be their comfortable self, their authentic self, because they want to be there, because they have a choice.
Yeah.
And if you don't create it, you lose out. And this reinforcing dynamic, we have found, again, we have a long way to go, so long way to go. But every time we've taken a little step and made progress, it's been magnified. And so I think just being able to get that message out, so and to continue to reinforce that, I think the two of you captured it for me perfectly. It's like, my gosh, we have to take these steps, or we lose out on such wonderful talent. And then even talent in the role doesn't feel as comfortable in doing what they would do. So you not only miss out on individuals, they also don't develop in the way they could. So to me, you both captured it perfectly, why this entire discussion is so critically important.
Well, like you both said, retaining talent is probably harder in the pandemic and remote working, because no one has to even leave their home to find a new job anymore. It's all done from the comfort of their lounge, which means you have to work twice as hard to retain them. So why would you not try and be as inclusive as possible? It makes no sense if you don't. Greg, I want to stay with you for a second to talk about intersectionality, because it's important that businesses do adopt an intersectional approach to inclusion in work to make sure that we're bringing the diversity strands together. What are some ways organizations can ensure that their numerous inclusion initiatives are cohesive?
Again, to offer a couple of thoughts, just food for thought. A recurring theme, Suki, I've come back to is this is all highly consistent with how you lead your business. We have something we call Aon United, which means we're bringing the best capability to our clients from all around the world. That requires a very connected approach. Talent, exactly the same way. Aon United for talent means the power of inclusion. Critical. By the way, you have to put steps in place to actually be able to do that. Back to content, insight, accountability, progress, discussion, all those things. We happen to be in a board. We have a series of board meetings today and tomorrow at Aon. I'm stepping out for this session. But this afternoon at 4 o'clock, our board is convening our Inclusion and Diversity Committee. So we have a committee of the board, that is coordinated by our chairman around this, which means in the end, where is your point of integration on this topic? Is it in your BRGs? Is it in the senior leadership? Is it with, the CEO? No, it has to be at the top of the organization, really understood throughout the organization. And that actually helps to integrate this. Again, it's not perfect, Suki, but it's structural. And it means because it's structural, we can get a little better every year. And for us, that's very, very important. So that's a couple of thoughts on things we've done.
Thanks, Greg. Leigh, I mean, obviously, we all have, sometimes we have multiple identities or different boxes that we tick. How do we ensure that we are what's your perspective on intersectionality?
Well, number one, in terms of intersectionality, I think you have to have clear objectives of what you really want to achieve, out of the activities that you are promoting in your organization. I think it's very important that, the intersectionality approach, because again, we are working in a diverse environment. Diversity is something that a lot of companies have already addressed. I think it's really more on the inclusion that we have to really work hard for. I cannot stress so much on having passionate leaders leading your ERG as opposed to you being nominated to lead it, because those are two different, things. You have to have passionate leaders leading your ERGs because, again, it has to come from the heart, unless, instead of just being told to lead the employee research group. More collaborations. I think one of the things that the company HSBC is doing good on is really more in collaborations between sites that you operate in the countries that you operate in, sharing of best practices, collaborating with other ERGs, just like Ability. One of the things that we do is that Pride and Ability have collaborated to come up with a reverse mentoring program. Where members of the Ability and Pride LGBT plus community are mentoring leaders and even staff members, about how they can really make the environment, the atmosphere more inclusive for members of the community.
Yeah, no, great. We don't have very long. We've only got 12 minutes left. That's like flown by. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Everyone watching, please do continue sending in your comments and questions, and we'll try and pose more to the panel. I want to actually ask you about your own role models. You're all sat here as the #1 role models for each of the respective lists. Like, who are your role models in business that you look up to? Beth, let's start with you.
I don't think my best role model is in business, actually. My best role model in my life has been my mom.
Yeah.
And my mom is to me, just an incredibly strong woman. She's got 8 children. I'm one of 8. I'm number 5. She was left at an orphanage when she was 5 by her parents, 5 and 3. So she then was in an orphanage, and she went to the woman who I knew as my grandmother and grandfather when she was 10 or 11. Then she got married young, and she raised us, and just incredibly resilient, incredibly strong. And she was a nurse, and then she became a psychologist. She went back to school, and then she became a minister. She said, first I worked in their body, then their minds, then their souls. And she's still with us, thankfully, but incredibly strong. So when I say that, because in business, as is in life. I think one of the best things that have made me a better leader is having children myself, because, you know, I don't have to engage in all of their tantrums. It's a really good learning when you're in business. I don't have to engage in all of the nonsense all the time. And with my mom, you know, somebody who is not only resilient, but intellectually curious, embraces everybody as they come. Just a terrific role model for me in my life and as a leader in business.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Lars has written in the text, "Mums rock," and I completely agree. Greg, what about you? Who's your role model in business or outside of business, actually?
Well, I would say Beth captured it well. And maybe there's a theme in nurses. My mom was also a nurse, and she, for the better part of my childhood, worked nights. So she would work all night and then come home and, you know, with their 3 kids, do what moms do. It was remarkable. Oh, it seemed remarkable at the time. It wasn't really until you reflect back after 10 or 15 years, you realize that it was not just remarkable, it was impossible. You know, I don't know how it's duplicated, to be candid. It kind of makes all the rest of the stuff we do look trivial. So that was absolutely a role model in many ways, shape, or form. You know, then there are leaders who are doing things that are unique. And, you know, not to embarrass you, Beth, but you're doing some things that are pretty unique. It's pretty unique what's been accomplished. And listen, I probably am somebody who cannot relate to many, but I can relate to the CEO part of it, and that's enough, and that's huge. So I just want to, if I could, as part of the panel today, just reflect on that. It's huge.
Right. And actually, I mean, for those of you, if you Google a recent Yahoo Finance interview that Beth did about agri-tech and the environment, it's incredible. And actually, Beth, the work you do also around rural communities and making sure that they're included, I think is also.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Huge.
Leigh, let's come to you. Your role model. Who do you look up to in business or outside of business?
Yeah, well, it's not that I'm copying their answers, but it's asking my mom as well. I think everybody, you know, would really love to say that their moms are their role models. As a trans woman, I've been ridiculed almost every day in my life, you know, just by living my authentic self. I think amongst the LGBT, most of the time, we have been the subject of ridicule, the transgender, at least in the Philippines. I'm speaking in the Philippine context. So I've been, you know, I've been called with different names. I've been misgendered most of the time. And I think the one person who has always been there, who has always supported me and accepted me for the entirety of myself, is really my mom. So I got my compassionate heart from her, you know, to look at people in a different way, not negatively, you know, let them do what they do. Just make sure that, you know, you actually pay them with kindness. And I think that's one of the best characteristics that I got from my mom. Yeah, so she's my role model.
No, that's great. Thank you, Leigh. We've had a good question from someone called Neil. What is the one thing you want to tell your 20-year-old self or to your youth? So let's go to you, Beth, first.
I want to have a conversation with my 20-year-old self. Oh, Suki.
And only one bit of advice for your 20-year-old.
Okay, one bit of advice.
Therapy and monologue.
My God, I don't even remember being 20. It feels like a totally different life. You know, I didn't know myself well enough then. And so forgetting the 20, because you're in college, and for me, and I was, you know, doing what you do in college and having a good time doing it. And then in my 20s, my first professional thing, I was doing that same thing, kind of like figuring out what it was to be a professional, and then figuring out where the party was that weekend, right? I mean, that's the truth. But what I would reflect back on is the thing that I think was most important, which is remind yourself every day to go on life's journey. A good, rich, full life is included. It includes disastrous mistakes. It includes wonderful love and joy, and it includes lots of fun and lots of people. And you're going to have failures, and that is part of a rich, full life. And you should embrace all of it. All of the mess of the human condition you should want. And I would tell myself in the 20s, because you know, everything seems so urgent, like, oh my God, I had a failure, oh my God. And then remind myself that, wait a minute, that's just part of life's journey, and embrace it all and learn from it and move on. And isn't that a wonderful, wonderful thing? And then the second thing I would say is remind yourself, it's really not about you, it's about everybody else. You need to help other people, engage them, engage in their life and their success, and that will make it a richer life too.
Fantastic. Greg, what would you say to your 20-year-old self?
I struggle with that there's so much that he needs to hear. It's just like it's going for a long time. I love the idea of live in the moment. Absolutely right. The notion of assume positive intent, always, it doesn't always come, isn't always there, but start with the assumption of positive intent and seek pattern recognition. I think about how narrow I was then in my pattern recognition of the world, and it causes me to worry how narrow I am now. And so seek pattern recognition in terms of sort of what you're trying to do. And then the final piece around, you know, same meaning as Beth, this is about the world, not about you. And to the extent you support others, you're a better leader. You support others, you're a better individual. You support others, you're more fulfilled. You know, hard to hear at a young age. By the way, hard to hear when you're super old like me. But it's you know, you sort of think about continued progression. So there'd be a few thoughts I might offer myself. Hopefully, I'd listen.
Thank you. And Leigh, to your 20-year-old self, although I feel like that wasn't very long ago, but
yeah, that was 10 years ago. But yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. If I was to talk to my 20-year-old self, I'll tell her that you are a star in your own authentic way. Keep strutting in your high heels with your head held high.
Absolutely, I love that. So I'm going to come around to you in a second, just to ask you like what your main advice would be to people about driving LGBT inclusion in business. I'll give you a second to think about that. But I mean the conversation today, because we literally have a few minutes left. It was great to hear some of the things around vulnerability and accountability. The new better, I think loads of people are going to steal it as much as I am. I definitely hear you, Beth, when you talk about LGBT women CEOs specifically, because I agree, there aren't enough women CEOs anyway than LGBT women. There are very few that we even know within the Outstanding Involved network ourselves, and we're always trying to reach out to more. And I love the whole thing around hiring the whole person and bringing the whole person to work, which I thought was fantastic. But it'd be great one by one if you could go around and share what your best advice would be to people on the Zoom now about driving LGBT plus inclusion. I'd like to come to Leigh first.
Just be an ally and respect everybody else.
Fantastic, thank you. Greg?
Take the time to understand this is an opportunity. It's not just an opportunity for the individuals, it's an opportunity for our organizations, for our communities. It's an incredible opportunity to unlock talent in ways that we have not been able to do before. So just remember and reinforce the opportunity.
Fantastic. And Beth, last but by no means least.
Yeah, the last thing I would say is to everybody who's listening to this is you're great just the way you are. You're great just the way you are, and remind yourself of that every day. You don't need to be somebody else. You don't need to start with somebody else or somebody smarter or prettier or whatever. That's nonsense. You're great just the way you are, and remind yourself that everybody else is great just the way they are. And when you do that and you show up that way, it's amazing the kind of friendships you can form, the kind of great work you can do, the kind of organization you can provide for the work that you want to do in your life. So just remind yourself you're terrific just the way you are.
Terrific just the way you are. Fantastic advice and feedback from my guests. A huge thank you to the three of you for joining us. I'd give you a round of applause myself, and I wish we could hear everyone else at home, but thank you.
I want that club music back, Suki.
I think they will be playing it in a second, but a huge
there we go.
One tuning in at home. There will be this has been recorded, so we'll be sharing the link with you all so you can share it with your colleagues. But we really appreciate you joining us. Our role model list for Empower, our ethnic minority role models, is open. So please do think about nominating your ethnic minority executives, future leaders, and allies. But thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Suki.
Wonderful. Thank you. Take care.